About 20 years ago, when I was really starting to get into model railroading and finding out about all the different quality and detailed products out there, one model that really caught my eye was the Bachmann Spectrum 840 CW, especially in the Chicago and Northwestern. It wasn't long after that I picked up a Union Pacific model, although it was heavily used and missing some parts and really needed some work to get going again. And after quite a bit of work, I managed to make it into a nice looking model, and it still remains a very smooth runner to this day. And then a few years after that, I got one of the revised Spectrum -8s in the BNSF war bonnet, and that is an even better model. It's really fantastic, smooth runner, and very nicely detailed too. I still kind of wanted to get one of the classic ones in the Chicago and Northwestern though. Recently, I managed to find one of the classic Chicago Northwestern units in practically new condition and for a really good price too, so I decided to pick it up, and here it is. Still in all of its original foam, handrails separate in their packaging. Looks like they're never opened, so I think this is about as close to brand new as I'm ever going to get for one of these. So let's get to putting this together, giving a little tune-up, and then getting this thing onto the layout. So there it is out of the box, and just giving it a quick inspection. There's really no dust or dirt or anything around it. Wheel treads are almost completely clean, so I don't think it's seen track maybe more than once, twice at the most, for probably no more than a minute. Honestly, the only problem I can find at all is the rear lift bar here is kind of bent out of shape, but I think that's just because it was stuffed into the tight foam of the box. It must have gotten caught on there and kind of ripped up. But that should be easy enough to fix. This was sold to me without any test run or anything, so before I get to assembling the details, first thing I'm going to do is just take it apart, make sure the grease is all good, and that it's ready to run. These are pretty easy to disassemble. First you have to remove the fuel tank, which is held on by 2 screws. That lifts off. And there are 2 more screws holding the body in place. With those 2 screws removed, the shell just lifts right off from the chassis, and they used one of their split designs here to give it quite a bit of weight as well as eliminate the need for wiring. So it made it really easy to put these together at the factory, I'm sure, and made for a low cost but powerful engine. Now let's see, looking over the different parts, I can see that there is some signs of grease in the gears. White lithium, that's what they were using at the factory at the time. It looks like it may still be good. I'll check on that a little bit closer. And the motor, it's got its 2 flywheels. Now to get into the chassis, there are 5 more screws that hold it closed. And with those out, the chassis will split apart. Maybe a little tight at first, so it can help to use a flat blade screwdriver to kind of pry around in a few places. There's this piece of tape here, peel that back. Once it's started, let's see, push the truck out of there, out of there. There, now it can lift off. And that reveals the parts inside, which are very easy to access now. And one thing about these plastic pieces that fit around the motor is that they kind of, well, I think they're actually rubber and they tend to dry out over time, so that one cracked right apart, but that'll be fine. Shouldn't cause any problems. These contacts touch the two sides of the chassis. So let's just power up the motor real quick, see how that is. Seems to be working just fine. I think I will give the bearings a little bit of fresh oil though, since they have been sitting for who knows how many years. That crack in the rubber did make it easy to get to that bearing. Yeah, that's better. No more maintenance needed there. I'll leave that sitting out for now. Just give the trucks a quick inspection. It's not bad, but it does feel a little bit stiff, so I'd say the grease and oil has somewhat dried out, so I better pull this apart, clean it up, and give it some fresh stuff. First, get that universal out of there just by giving that a little tug. Take out the top screw from the truck. Need a small Phillips to do that, because the larger one does not fit that screw head. A couple more screws in there. Take that off, and now the worm can come out. It's kind of snapped in there. Bit of an interesting design. I think they actually still use these trucks for some of their standard line models. There we go. And the truck side frames, they just pull off. And by doing that, the electrical contacts will be able to come off from these tabs once I take the wheels out. And to get the wheels out, all you do is unsnap the bottom cover, and there they go. There go the contacts. And all that's left is the two big idler gears. And to get those out, press on those pins. Pull them out from the other side. And the gears drop right out from the bottom. So that's everything for disassembling one of these things. They're actually very easy to work on. I'm going to clean up these parts. I'm really not doing anything special. Just wiping the old grease off with a paper towel. And the stuff that's in the gear teeth, I can just brush out. Yeah, considering the condition of these parts, that's really all they need. And then to get inside of the truck to clean that, since it's a single piece molding, you can go in there with a Q-tip. Just kind of wipe back and forth till it's all cleaned up. And the rest of that I can get with the paper towel. There's still a little bit of the old stuff left inside, but that's all right. And taking care of the wheels, just more of the same. Kind of wipe around there with the paper towel, get the old stuff out. There really isn't any cleaning to do on the wheels since they're in good shape. And one possible problem with some of these old Bachmanns is that the nylon gears on the axles can split. That happened with one of the axles on my other Dash 8. Had to fix it. So I'll be watching for that while I clean each one of these. Okay, last piece is the worm here. Also, on the universal piece here is also pretty well known for splitting. And it looks like this one has too, so I'll have to glue that back onto the shaft and it should be fine. So to clean out the worm, I'm just using my nail with a bit of the paper towel. That allows me to kind of dig down into the groove and really get most of the grease cleaned out. On this model, the worm has 2 spirals on it, so you have to do that twice to get through it. That double spiral also doubles the speed over the gear ratio you might get in most other HO models. So they compensate for that by using a slower motor. And the bushings here, swipe those off a little bit. There were no washers on this one. It's just the worm itself and then the 2 bronze bushings. Now I should go ahead and get this part back on. So to do that, first I'm just gonna get a little bit of, baking soda onto the shaft there. Then put a drop of glue into the hole. This is liquid super glue. Then twist that on a little bit. And the excess, just brush that out. And the baking soda combined with super glue gives that a really, really strong hold. It still may not be quite as perfect as a good press fit, but I think that'll hold well enough. Now just get this last bit of grease out from the cover plate. You need the Q-tip for that one. There, that's it for the cleanup of that truck. Now to get it back together, let's see, both of these gears are the same size, so there's no particular order. Let's drop one in there, get the steel shaft, press that in, make sure it's going through the hole and through both sides. Sometimes you can squeeze these sides a little bit while they're while pressing that shaft in, and that causes binding of the gear. So when that happens, you can just kind of go in with a flat blade screwdriver, pry out a little bit, and that'll take care of that. So that turns nice and free. I should get some oil in there though, so I'm going to push that back out a little bit. Put in a drop of oil. Kind of missed there. I'll do one more drop. There, that'll be better. Press that in again. Easier to put the oil in to the gear before dropping that in. Just test that real quick. Yeah, that'll be good. Now before I put the wheels back in, I should put these contact strips back onto there. Middle axle will help to hold that in. Everything's turning nice and freely. Electrical wipers make a little noise. Now a little bit of fresh oil for each axle. Now to finish things, I'll use the same kind of grease Bachmann did, white lithium. Just put it around in a few different areas. Spread it around. And just kind of work that in both directions. Now snap this cover plate back on. There, press the side frames back on. Just oil those bearings a little. Put it on the surface of the worm so that it kind of works its way all the way through. Everything is turning nice and freely. So to get that in, just start at an angle like that. Push back on the worm and get it into that front slot. And squeeze on that a little to make sure the bearings are set. And that turns nice and free. Now I'll finish that off by putting this cover piece back on. It's all still turning freely. So the last thing is put this piece back on. So I tend to tighten that down and then just back it off a tiny bit at a time. This should be able to turn freely but not allow much slop. So right about there is where I want it. So that's one truck done. Now I'll do the same for the other one. Alright, both trucks are done, so now I can put this back together. I'll start by just dropping the motor in there. Push that back in place. And it looks like the other chunk of the rubber piece is still in place, so that's fine. I won't worry about the fact that that's cracked. Now the trucks. First I'll get the universal into the motor socket. Okay, make sure the contact plate is touching. And then get this into the slot, just like that. Same for the other truck. Now for the other half of the chassis. Engineer lost his arm while I was working on that. Oops. Little glue will fix that. Anyway, to get this half back on, start out nice and straight. Use a screwdriver to get the contact strips in place. There. Now make sure this is fitting down over all the different inserts. Okay, that all looks good. And I didn't drop any washers from around there either. You definitely don't want to lose those washers because if you do, the halves will touch and it'll short out. Now take the screws and then just one at a time, get them all back into place. And then these plastic posts, if any of them move out of place, you can just press them back in. Sometimes they're a little difficult though. Kind of have to move the halves around while you work at it. Eventually they snap in place. While tightening these screws, make sure you don't go at it too hard because I have done that before and it can cause these plastic posts to actually break. Sometimes they want to slip around in there, so when that happens, just use a screwdriver or something at the other ends to help get it started, and then tighten it down. Gotta get that arm back in place. Goes right there. There, that's good. And everything stayed where it's supposed to be, all the contact strips. So I'm just gonna hook this up real quick to make sure that it's running. Then I'll put the shell back on and get onto the actual assembly of the model. Okay, all looks good. It's working nice and smooth, real quiet. This model has a simple directional lighting circuit. To do that, they screw this PC board into the top of the shell and have a spring that contacts each side of the frame. And that goes to a couple diodes, which control the directional lighting. And the headlights are in those little tubes there, or at least a tube in the front, and then the other one is just covered by a piece of tape in the back. Slide that on. With that last screw in, that's all there is to doing a tune-up on one of these. So very easy to work on. Now let's get on to the actual details. There are two bags. One of them has the main handrails, and the other one has the end railings and smaller parts. I'll just slice that open. Interesting, one handrail is on its tree and the other one was not. Little warped spot there. Well, maybe I can fix that. These things were manufactured quickly and put into tight foam, so it's not really a surprise that some of these little details get a little bent up here and there. Okay. Now all these should just press into place. I'll start with the stanchions. Yeah, those just press in there. It's not too tight, but not too loose either. Although inconsistency in the paint can make some a little tighter than others. And in that case, you just grip them with some pliers and then press them in. And then this end, grab that with the pliers and press that in. Straighten it out a little. And then the end of this handrail just kind of broke off when I touched it, so it must have had a little defect out of the box. So looking at the other one, looks like, okay, this is the bottom of the railing. That's the top. So this piece really doesn't press in place, so I'm going to have to use a touch of glue to hold that in. Start with the bottom of it. Go ahead and get these other parts out now. Yeah, so that's the end railings, as well as the nose grab irons. Couple horn hook couplers, snowplow, horn. Let's see. I think there are also supposed to be a couple sunshades. I wonder if those are still in the box somewhere. Oh yeah, there they are. So unlike the rest of the parts, these sunshades are made from brass. If I can just get them out of the packaging. There. And like the other parts, these should be able to press into place. Just gonna push that in. Yeah, those press fit in place, so that's good. Then you've got these grab irons that fit in the top of the nose. And there are these two railings. This should be another press fit. Not the tightest fit, but it's staying in there. If I find that they're not going to hold in place, I'll just use a little bit of glue. This one does feel pretty loose. So I'm going to put a tiny bit of glue just on this end. Push that back into the hole, and now it should hold in place. And now the end railing. Get the lift bar out of the way of that. There, and then the last front pilot detail is the snowplow. Let's see if this will press in or if it needs glue. Okay, that's going in pretty tight. Just using a bit of a rocking motion while I press it in. Then the other side handrail. Now before I press in that end, I see some flash on there, so I'm just going to try and clip that off real quick. And it looks like that's not going to stay in on its own, so that's going to need a little more glue. I'll just put some on the end of a wire. Get that into the hole. Now push that back in. I'll just hold that in for a moment while it sets. Now this piece here, see if I can straighten that out a little bit first. Some needle nose pliers. It's a little weak right there, so I want to be careful. Okay, so now I'm going to put in the rear handrail, and then I think I'll be able to maybe put a touch of glue here and there to help keep that lift bar detail straight the way that it needs to be. These last holes are in a bit of a tricky spot. I think there may actually be a little too much paint in a couple of those holes, so I'm going to clean them out a little bit. Okay, let's try this again. There, finally got those in. So now just the last two ends need to go into there. Okay, so the last detail is the horn. And that just presses into the top like that. And that had a good fit, so that's not going anywhere. Now all that's left to put in is the couplers. So these have a metal plate that fits down. So the longer end of the plate faces to the back. Then just take one of these screws and tighten that in. But make sure not to over tighten it, or the couplers won't be able to move. Spring action on these couplers isn't the best, but I'll be replacing them later on anyway. There, and that's all the assembly for the detail parts. So now I'll just fix a couple of those little damaged spots, and this will be done. Alright, with those little details repaired, the Dash 8 is now finished. So let's get this over to the layout. Alright, so there it is on the layout, and I think that turned out pretty well. So with this being one of the early Spectrum models, the detail on it isn't the best. The moldings are a little chunkier, you might say, than what you would see on maybe a finer scale model. And even most of Bachmann's latest products are quite a bit finer than this, even in the standard line. So by today's standards, it's not exactly the best looking model, but I think it is still a good looking one at least. Now regarding the Chicago Northwestern paint, they actually never owned any Dash 8s, but they did own Dash 9s that were painted this way, so the road number actually matches up to the Dash 9s. These do look pretty similar though, which I think is why Bachmann decided they could get away with it. Just have a little bit of a fantasy paint scheme. And to make this look more like a Dash 9, you could maybe replace the truck side frames with some of the correct ones, and then it would at least look pretty close, even if it is 3 scale feet shorter. The detail quality, it's alright, but not really the best. Again, this is one of their early Spectrum models, so they hadn't really done too much with separate details at this point. So in the handrails, in certain areas, you may notice little bits of maybe flash or seams. Getting close up there, it's a little more visible now. Grab irons, they are wire, which is nice. That makes them durable. Pre-installed at the factory. They are just blackened though, instead of painted, so they don't exactly match the paint schemes of at least most of the models. The paint quality is decent though. It's nice and smooth all around, very opaque coloring. Chicago Northwestern logo. It's very clear, well done. I just noticed that right there. They actually have the Dash 9 printing instead of Dash 8. So that's kind of confirmation that they decided they could put that on there and just kind of get away with it, even though this is a Dash 8 model. None of the ventilation is see-through. It's all molded. Doesn't look bad, has some depth to it. Horn, very cheap, very basic. Replacing that one with a better quality part would be an improvement in that area. Then more onto the ventilation, other walkway detail on top. Looks pretty good. It's not quite the sharpest, but it's not bad either. Get a separate brake wheel there, although it's a little bit thick. Again, not bad. Then you've got a printed sign right here, which is readable. The trucks, there's not much to them. You've got the one-piece side frame with a couple separate tank details, and then a wire that goes between the two of them. There wasn't really much more to the real ones though, so those look just fine. Turning that around, now you've got a GE logo down here, and that's clearly printed. All of the lettering that's next to it isn't really readable. It at least has some presence. For the pilot details, you've got the ditch lights on there, which is nice, although they don't light up. And I think a little touch of maybe silver or chrome paint in the lenses would help them to look a little better. Then the snowplow, it's a pretty cheap part, not really that good looking, but at least they have it there. Now, as for the running quality, let's see how that looks. Takes a few volts to get it started. It is quiet. Very smooth, steady. Of course, there's some freight cars on the track, so I'm not going to run it into that. Doesn't really maintain low speed very well because of the gear ratio, which is 7:1. In most HO scale diesels, you'll get a 12:1 or 14:1 ratio. So in order to make this run at a more realistic speed, they also used a much slower motor. I think it's maybe 5,000 RPM at the high end. Even with that though, it's going pretty fast. So maybe that's about a 6,000 RPM motor. Just a light growl to the gears, although they do still work smoothly. So I'm just going to push these cars back a little bit. That way I can back up the model, get these switches activated. There's no problem at all going through. So I'm just going to let this run around for a while, let it break in a little, and then get back to it. Okay, so I've had this running for about an hour and a half total. Give it plenty of time in both directions to really get broken in. And I think that's helped out with the speed control and operation of it. The starting voltage has dropped by about 2 volts, so that's pretty good. It took almost 6 volts to get it going on that first run, and now it's down to about 4. I also did some tests on the speed. And the maximum speed, 12 volts, it's about 100 miles per hour. As for the low speed, it can get down to about 4 miles per hour, but it doesn't maintain it steadily. So it's definitely not a good mechanism for switching, but for just running as a mainline engine, it's perfectly acceptable. It's a very smooth runner at all speeds, very steady, and even when I slip the wheels, there's no wobble from it at all. So the wheels are definitely very well made, well turned. Now hooking up some cars. I have the same load behind it that I was using for the other two earlier in the video, except I also have this boxcar in the middle with some IHC Magic Mate couplers, so that I use this one as a transition boxcar for any engines that still have horn hooks. Starts up pretty smoothly, It's nice and quiet. So it's just over 9 volts, about 9.5. It's a good realistic speed. Also has no problem at all running around 18-inch radius curves. And it can actually go on an even tighter radius than that, I think, possibly down to 15, because the trucks have a lot of ability to rotate. Of course, with the size that it is, looks best on 22-inch or larger. Now, for the sake of comparison, I've gotten out my other Spectrum model. So right away you can see how much of a difference there is in detail. The newer model has quite a bit more, especially in the pilot area. They've got windshield wipers, as well as some other extra little things. The main cab windows, you can actually slide those open. It's got a fully detailed interior. A little more detail to the trucks. This part here can lift off, the grille. That allows you some access to the inside, as well as ease of installation for maybe a large speaker if you want to do sound. It also has some other nice little touches, like these etched grills on the sides. Give it a little see-through effect. It's got more detail to the paint too, finer quality handrails. So the newer Spectrum model really is quite an improvement over the old one, but it also costs a lot more. And it's also hard to find them, in my experience, just because they didn't make them for quite as long. Also, for comparison, I've gotten out my Atlas-840B. So you can see just how much of a difference in detail there is when you spin the extra on the Atlas model. There's much more fine detail work in the grill area here. These are etched metal parts over the molded vents. The overall detail of the body, it's very high quality, very sharp. You got treads on all the walkways. And also, when you look at the side of the vent there, they've got that molded in sort of radiator fan detail, although that's not actually see-through. It's just a little raised spot in the plastic. And it's got quite a few other nice touches all around. Real top quality paintwork. So when you're comparing models, it's pretty obvious that the old version Spectrums really aren't the best when it comes to detail. But honestly, at the time they were released, they were pretty good. The only other options were the rail power shell, which you had to use an Athearn chassis to power and paint it yourself, or you could get a really expensive brass model. So for a low cost, ready to run option, this was a really good deal in its day, and honestly they did a lot better job on the cab than rail power did, so I think this is actually the better looking of the two. Overall, I would say that this is a very good model for the lower price range. It may not have the detail and features of the higher end models, but it's not really intended to compete much with those either. These were made to be strong, smooth runners that are easy to work on, easy to maintain, and all for a pretty good value, especially if you can find them in the $30 to $50 range like I did for this one.